Well, welcome. We're glad to have you here with us, Jerry. We're going to pretend that there's a big audience and we're just going to have a great time. So we're here to talk about the 12 Months, which is a folktale from modern Greece. Our presenter today is Mary Ann Bensavengo. I am going to turn on, let me turn this on just to see if that's a little bit too loud, maybe. I'll leave it the way it is since it's just Jerry. So we're going to let her get started, and then I will come back and read to you. So, okay, lady. Okay, Mary Ann, come on. Don't be able to see yourself, but you're there. Jerry's there, so.
Okay, hello. I'm Mary Ann, and it's nice to whoever is tuning in. I see now that at least one person is here. Jerry. Hi, Jerry. We're gonna, as Jennifer said, talk about the 12 Months today, a folktale from modern Greece. And Jennifer's gonna read it in a second. So when we get started though, before the tale, just think about the early days, olden times, before electricity, before there was TV, radio, phone streaming, movie theaters to go to, when the entertainment was sitting around the fire telling stories, or at the fireplace, or by candlelight. And that was the beginning of the folktale tradition, which is called the oral tradition, when people told stories. And not only just for entertainment, but they also encoded teachings in these stories for the community of what was expected within the community. So anyways, Jennifer's going to read the story now as if we're around the campfire.
Yes. Thank you. Okay. Hi again, Jerry. Okay, the 12 months. Oh, you know what? I need my glasses because I'm an old lady. Okay. Okay. Once upon a time, there was a widow woman who had 5 children, but she was so poor that she hadn't so much as a brass farthing. She could find no work to do except once a week, when a gentlewoman of the neighborhood had her in to bake her bread. But for her trouble, she did not give her even the corner of a loaf to take for her children to eat. But the poor woman went home with the dough on her hands, and there she washed them in clean water, and this water she boiled and made gruel, and this the children ate. And with this gruel they were satisfied the whole week, till their mother went again to make bread at the gentlewoman's house and returned, with hands unwashed, to make them gruel again. The gentlewoman's children, for all the food they had, so much and so rich, and for all the fresh bread they fed on, were like dried mackerel. But the poor woman's children were filled out and chubby, like plump red mullet. Even the gentlewoman was amazed and spoke about it to her friends. Her friends said, "The poor woman's children are filled out and chubby because she takes away your children's luck on her hands and gives it to her own children. That is why they get fat, and yours grow thinner and dwindle away." The gentlewoman believed this, and when the day came again for making bread, she did not let the poor woman leave with her hands unwashed, but made her wash them clean, so that the luck should stay in her house. And the poor woman came home with tears in her eyes. When her children saw her, and saw that she had no dough on her hands, they began to cry. On the one hand, the children wept, and on the other, the mother. At last, like a grown woman, she steeled herself and calmed her tears and said to her children, "Dry your eyes, my children, and weep no more, and I'll find a piece of bread for you to eat." And she went from door to door and barely found someone to give her a stale corner of bread. She dipped it well in water and shared it among her children. And when they had eaten, she put them to bed and fell asleep. And at midnight she left the house without looking back, lest she see her children dying of hunger. As she walked through the wilderness in the night, she saw a light shining on a high place and went toward it. And when she drew close to it, she saw a room with 12 candles, and underneath it hung a round thing like a ball. She went into the tent and saw 12 young men who were talking over what to do about a certain matter. The tent was round, and to the right of the entrance sat 3 young men with their collars open, and in their hands they carried tender grass and tree blossoms. Next to these young men sat another three, with their sleeves rolled up and coatless, carrying in their hands dry ears of wheat. Next to these sat another three young men, each with a bunch of grapes in his hand. Next to these sat another three young men, each huddled over himself and wearing a long fur from the neck to the knee. When the young men saw the woman, they said, "Greetings, good aunt, be seated." And after greeting them, the women sat down. And when she was seated, they asked her how it was she had come to that place. And the poor woman told them of her plight and her troubles. Seeing that the poor woman was hungry, one of those who wore furs got up and laid the table for her to eat. And she saw that he was lame. When the woman had eaten her fill, the young men began to ask her of things about the country, and the woman answered as well as she could. At last, the three young men that had their collars open said to her, "Now, good aunt, how do you get on with the months of the year? How do you like March, April, and May?" "I like them well, my lads," answered the widow. "And indeed, when these months come, the mountains and fields grow green, the earth is gay with all kinds of flowers, and from them comes the God feeling. All birds begin to sing. The husbandmen see that their fields are green and rejoice in their hearts and make their granaries ready. So we have no complaints against March, April, and May. Otherwise, God would send fire to burn us for our ingratitude." Then the next three young men that had their sleeves rolled up and ears of wheat in their hands said, "Well, and what have you to say to June, July, and August? Nor can we complain about those 3 months, because with the warmth they bring, they ripen the crops and all the fruits. Then the husbandmen reap what they have sown, and the gardeners gather the fruit. We, the poor, are made happy by these months. They do not need many and costly clothes." Then the next three young men that carried grapes, "How do you get on with the months of September, October, and November?" "In those months," answered the woman, "folks gather grapes and make them into wine, and they are good besides, in that they tell us that winter is coming. And folks set about getting in wood, coals, and heavy clothing so as to keep warm." Then the three young men in furs asked her, "Now, how do you get on with December, January, and February?" "Oh, those are the months that care for us greatly," said the poor woman, "and we love them very much. And will you ask for why? Here's why. Because folk are by nature insatiable and would like to work the whole year round so as to earn much. But those winter months come and cause us to draw into a corner and rest ourselves after the summer's labors. Folk love these months because with their rains and snows, they cause all the seeds and grasses to grow. So my lads, all the months are good and worthy, and each one does his work. May God preserve them. It is us folk who are not good." Then 11 of the young men made a sign to the first of those who carried grapes, and he went out and very shortly came back with a stoppered jar in his arms, and he gave it to the woman, saying, "Come now, auntie, and take this jar home with you to raise your children on." Joyfully, the woman took the jar on her shoulder and said to the young men, "May your years be many, my lads. May the hour be good to you, good aunt." They answered, and she went. Just as the dawn was breaking, she came back home and found her children still asleep. She spread out a cloth and emptied the jar onto it. When she saw that it was full of gold pieces, she all but went out of her mind for joy. When it was well and truly light, she went to the baker's and bought 5 or 6 loaves and an oka of cheese, and woke her children, washed and tidied them, set them to say their prayers, and gave them bread and cheese. And the little dears ate until they were truly full. Then she bought a kilo of wheat and took it to the mill and had it ground, made it into dough, and took the loaves to the bakery to bake. And just as she was returning from the bakery with the board laden with bread on her shoulder and was almost home, the gentlewoman saw her and suspected that something had happened to her, and ran up to her to learn where she got the flour to make bread with. The poor woman innocently told her all. The gentlewoman was envious and made up her mind that she too would go to see the young man. So that night, when her husband and children were asleep, she slipped out of the house and took the road and went on till she found the tent where the 12 months were and greeted them. And they said to her, "Greetings, mistress. How is it that you have consented to visit us?" "I am poor," she answered. "I have come to you for help." "Very good," said the young man. "And how are things where you come from?" "They might be worse," she answered. "Well, how do you get on with the months?" they asked her. "How indeed," she answered. "Each one is a sore trial. Just as we are getting used to the heat of August, straight away September, October, and November come along and chill us so that this one gets a cough and that one catches a cold. Then the winter months, December, January, and February come in and freeze us. The roads fill with snow and we cannot go out. And as for that lame John of a February, poor February was listening. And then those accursed months, March, April, and May, they don't consider themselves to be summer. Turn the page, sorry. Months. And all they want is to act like winter ones. So they make the winter last 9 months. And we can never go out on the 1st of May and drink coffee with milk in it and sit on the new grass. Then come the months June, July, and August. They're the ones that are mad to stifle us with heat, sweat by the heat they bring. Indeed, on the 15th of August, we are all in a fit of coughing, and the bitter winds spoil our lines in the clothesline. What more can I say, lads? Our life with the months, may curses befall them, is a dog's life. The young man said nothing, but made a sign to him who sat in the middle of those bearing grapes. And he got up and brought in a stoppered jar and gave it to the woman and said, "Take this jar, and when you get home, lock yourself up in a room alone and empty it out. See that you do not open it on the way." "I won't," said the woman. She went and joyfully came home just before dawn. Then she locked herself in a room all alone, spread out a cloth, and unstoppered the jar and emptied it out. And what came out of it? Nothing but snakes. They coiled themselves about her and devoured her alive. She left her children motherless, for it is wrong for one to accuse another. But the poor woman, with her true heart and her sweet tongue, went up in the world and became a great lady, and her children flourished. There, that's what they call a happy ending. Okay. I'm going to turn it back over to Mary Ann now.
Wonderful story. I love hearing it. Was reading. Nice to hear a life story, isn't it?
Push this to forward your slides.
Okay. All right.
Okay.
Thank you. Well, in the story of the 12 months, a tale from modern Greece, in folk tales and fairy tales, we usually have the extremes. So right away, what is happening in the story is there's a contrast set up between the rich woman and the poor woman, and the woman who's trying to, poor woman being the woman who's trying to nourish and keep her kids fed. You said it's this button right down here. Right, okay. Right. And so when we have the comparison that we see right away, compare, contrast, that happens in folktales a lot because we want everything to be absolute. We want everything to be in black and white. A lot of people think that folktales and fairy tales were only written for children, and that's why they like the black and white, to make children love absolutes. They like everything to be kind of definite, so they have borders and boundaries for everything. But here too, we have women and men of age reading the tales, also around the fire. And so they weren't just for children. So we still need absolutes sometimes, even as adults, but it's also for convenience, because we're encoding, as I mentioned earlier, the societal codes are in the tale, what we expect out of each other. We expect people to be good. We don't want to be evil, cruel, mean. So right away, we have a widow struggling to feed her children, which was actually a really common, not just motif in folklore, but it was real. The people back then were some often struggling for survival if they didn't have quite the convenience of a Kroger's or whatever type of grocery store. It was harder to bake your own bread or come across your own bread, have the money to do things. So on the one hand, we have somebody struggling, and then we have another person who's well-to-do. And then the poor woman makes bread for the rich woman, but the rich woman who could pay her just pays her, really, it says she doesn't really pay her anything. And then for the poor woman, here's sort of a reversal. Even though her children are fed so little, just the gruel that they make, like a porridge off of the bread left on her hands, the dough, when the poor woman goes home and makes soup, yet the children of the poor family are the ones who are more plump and more healthy than the rich woman's children, who are said to be so skinny, as far as you wonder, why are they still not being nourished? If they have money and bread, where's that bread going? Where's that money going? So that's something, of course, to consider and think about. We see that the mother takes the dough home on her hands and bakes her gruel out of it to feed them. And when this happens, is it luck that she gets to do that? She's being sort of resourceful. The older woman doesn't even really notice her taking those things home. So the dough and the bread become symbols, as they often do, of the old world. The staff of life as wheat, grains, being healthy. It's one of the things that people could fill themselves on, even in harder times, sometimes was the grain and the bread. And so what she needs to feed her children are really already in her hands. She's already being resourceful. And that the neighbors then tell the rich woman, as we saw in the story, that, oh my gosh, she's taking the luck out of your house. She's removing it. So by taking that dough out, so we already know that it's superstition, right? There's a superstition going on, and it sets the tale up for some sort of supernatural occurrence or odd occurrence later, because isn't that rather an odd thing to think of or say, oh, there she's removing the luck from your home, and that's why your children aren't doing so well and healthy. So the dough, as the nurturing motif or symbol here, is very real to the older age, the olden days. And she has the task. So we often hear in heroes' tales, there's always a hero of the story. And in this case, it's a woman who's trying to feed her family. And obviously, as we see at the end, she's the one who gets rewarded. So she's been rewarded for the tasks that she had to fulfill of feeding her children, because this was the heroine's journey back then. We hear about Joseph Campbell, the more modern mythologist, who came up with the idea of the hero's journey. We often hear it as how it was put to other tales and is exemplified in things like Star Wars. And Joseph Campbell actually helped with Star Wars. So that's the hero's journey actually is sort of formulaic, although the details of the story vary. So the heroine in the story in the older days, before women were really leaving the house and going to work, unless they ran a bakery or were a seamstress, perhaps working from home or something, their task was usually in the home. So whether it's Cinderella escaping the stepmother, she's a heroine. In this case, it's this woman's a hero. We have more modern Disney tales being told today, like Mulan and things of more heroes' journeys for the feminine. But at the time of when these tales were told first, that got recorded, there wasn't as much female outer world types of journeys. So when she, getting back, when she gets to the sink and the woman makes her wash her hands finally. And she, the rich woman, well, you can't take the luck out of my house, she's thinking. And so people warned her, don't share your luck with other people. Go ahead, be stingy. Don't be generous. She sounds like Scrooge. So it's another Scrooge motif type tale. The mother is not totally innocent in the sense of unknowing. It's not a bad knowing. It's a good knowing. You have to learn how to be resourceful. So there's another sort of moral in the story about being resourceful when it's possible. Of course, she's prevented then. So it wasn't a sneaky thing to do per se, but she's proactive, and that's good. So something ventured and something gained. While the children are sleeping in bed in this perfect innocence with their dreams of all their childhood play and needs and probably comfort and food, sugar plums and the whole bit, the mother is going out into the wilderness. She's trying to find a way to save her family, feed her family. And she, in doing so, discovers things that is sort of like that loss of that innocence. She gains a new type of wisdom. And in tales, like any folk tale or fairy tale, there's often a threshold place where you go off somewhere that's different, whether it's off into the woods or you're crossing a sea or you're crossing over a stream. That going into that woods is that going over through the threshold into the journey. And so that call that you get into the journey, the call is to do the task at hand. For some people, that's a career. For some people, they feel called to a career. For some people, they're called to come up with a great idea to help their family become more healthy, well-to-do, how to sustain life. So that woods is very symbolic of going through the task, making it through the woods. And the beacon calls her, that's the call. The call is like, oh, when you get in the story, when Jennifer read about seeing the light in the distance, it goes up the hill, looking up the hill into the distance, that's where the 12 months are sitting. And she knows that that's like wow, there's something calling her, and there it is. It's the sudden realization, like the flash going off in your brain of an idea that something big is about to happen. She's encountering some type of life, not knowing it's going to be supernatural. Excuse me, at that time. So it's also during those times you're going from a known area into an unknown area, and that's where you find all your knowledge and your wisdom. So when she gets to the campfire, and there sit the 12 months, she gets there and they are sitting around the campfire before electricity, before TV, radio, nothing streaming on the phone, but the months of the year, and the fire is streaming and the smoke is streaming. So the 12 months were spring, of course, of spring, the 3, 3, 3, and 3. They're divided into threes. And in spring, the collars are open. So what would that represent? Now, I don't know if the volume goes back and forth. It seems like these seem like very simple questions to ask. What would a collar open represent? It represents the warmer months, of course, and the coldness of winter is such that you can remove your sweater or actually open your collar. In fact, if you have too much on and a scarf, you're probably going to get warm. So even though these questions seem really simplistic for adults, and fairy tales are pretty simplistic, really, we look at the gray matter of the fairy tale as adults looking back at them. But if you're working with children, it's a good question to ask them, because it teaches them critical thinking. It teaches them how to look for cues within a story. So if I was reading this to a room of children, I say, oh, well, the colors are open. What does it represent in the spring? And for summer, the sleeves are rolled up. Of course, that symbolizes work and being able to reap what you sow, which is another theme, of course, of a folk tale or fairy tale. There's usually some form of retribution. If you work hard, if you have a good work ethic, if you have good morals in your heart, you're going to get the wheat, you're going to get the fruits of your labors. So let's see, we have spring and summer, and of course, fall, carrying the grapes. And the grapes, they all turn, the 11 months all turn to the one carrying the grapes, because the grapes represent the harvesting, the time of the harvest before the winter, before things are all gone. And they represent the fruit of the vine, or the fruit of life, the wine of life. And let's see, we get to, oh, winter, wearing the long furs. I was almost getting ahead of myself here. Winter, when they wear the furs, of course, the cold is obvious, but then we could ask, why is winter in the story lame? Of course, he's old. Old Man Winter is one of the sayings we have for winter, and some of us, our joints ache worse in the winter if we live up north. So we get that saying too about, winter, it's such a lame season. Oh, it's too cold. Oh, it's lame. Because they're thinking, oh, I don't get to do anything. I don't get out as much. So we get all those different sayings and little idioms of speech a lot from our folk tales. Those are also part of folklore. Not just stories, but the things people say, do. So when the mean woman goes to the months, all she does is complain. Every season has a complaint. Spring is this, summer's this, fall's this, winter's this. But the other woman who was goodness exemplified, she, which we all would strive to be, I would think. Not very many people like to align themselves with the villain, and the people that do, I kind of like to stay away from. So before in other discussions, but so the one gets a jar full of gold. It's the same thing about if you teach someone to fish, they can be fed for life. If she got a jar of jam, it probably wouldn't have lasted very long. If she got a jar of soup, it wouldn't last very long. But she gets gold, everything she needs for the rest of her life. The other one, she loses her life. The jar is like Pandora's box. In Greek mythology, it was actually originally a jar. And for punishment, she is devoured. So for anybody who has a phobia of snakes, I'm sorry about the snake photo in there, and I kind of threw the gummy worms in there for a little bit of comic relief or a sense of humor to lighten that up a little bit. And the moral of the story, be kind, don't complain, be grateful, have gratitude, find good in everything. Most of us think about that at certain times of the year, certain times when we want to turn over a new leaf, we want to be more like a Cinderella or a Dorothy in our lives. We try to teach our children that, to be very good like that. Don't be mean, don't be negative, don't complain like the evil stepmother or wicked witch. It goes a little bit further than that. What is cruel? We have to think, what is being mean? We have to look at the types of, I should go back for a second. We have to look at the types of, oops. Wow, now I'm getting way ahead. Okay, there we go. Sorry about that. Yeah, I got it. Thank you. So when we are trying to be good, we think, well, I don't know if I can be good all the time. So this could be another slide that I didn't do. Just picture an iceberg and picture the tip of the iceberg and at the triangle. And then what's below the surface is all this baggage, all this other stuff, all the things that, we could tell stories about our own lives, about what we like about winter or what we don't like. We could be like the good woman and tell everybody what we love about spring, summer, winter, fall. Or we could be the other one and we could tell our own stories. For instance, I'm not crazy about winter because I don't like it when my car has to be shoveled out of the driveway. So we all complain about things like that. So are we wicked? I don't know. I don't think so. I mean, if we sat around and cursed the months, maybe that would be a little bit more wicked. It's natural to be a little bit good and a little bit so-called bad or complain sometimes. We all do. So we also have to think about moralistically in stories like this. When is it good to speak up? When is it not good to speak up? The woman who snuck the dough on her hands out of the house, she could have spoke up. She could have said, I need to be paid. But of course, she's afraid of losing her job. She could have, she could have been a little bit more, you would think that meeting the 12 months, she might have said, oh, well, I work for this woman, when they asked the mean woman how are things going with her and why she's there, she lies to them. She tells them, well, I'm poor. She's not poor. They said, how are you getting along? Well, things could be a little better. But the other woman, she doesn't say anything. So she just kept her mouth shut totally. When do we do that? And when don't we? There's a balance in life, of course. So when we're seeing a bully like the mean woman, and you wonder why her children are thin, or she's being cruel to the other woman, you would think that somebody might notice or speak up. The neighbors don't. They don't do anything. They just align with the well-to-do. So anyways, so I guess they're mean also. So that would be the end of our story, but I guess we learned that, well, nothing's perfect. Does it ever make a difference to complain about the seasons? No. The seasons are the seasons, and we go with the natural order of things. And we can all complain a little bit, I would suppose, that it's okay. So then after that, we have the history of the calendar origins, which is interesting to look at because of our 12 months. There's a lot more information. I leave a website if you want to read more about it. There's a website at the end of each of these after the months of the year origins. So a lot of the several old world calendars came before our today's Gregorian calendar. And there was King Romulus around 753 BC, who came up with the first known calendar, basically in Rome, that resembles our modern calendar. Then the Julian calendar came along with Julius Caesar, and he renovated it to a solar calendar from a lunar calendar. And that way it followed the path of the sun, but it created the complication of the leap years because then there were extra days sometimes because the moon was, of course, followed before that. And it was more accurately, it could include things like leap year or whatever, extra days here and there. Today's Gregorian calendar was developed around 1582 by Pope Gregory VIII, and he changed the Julian calendar to make it easier to divide the numbers of days into a year. And this also ended up correcting solstices, equinoxes, and Easter celebrations, things like that. So the dates would stay more aligned to the sun's revolutions. But interestingly enough, some of our holidays still come like at the second new moon after the winter solstice, or the first new moon after the winter solstice, and Easter is one of those that is also attributed to a lunar time. So after it's the first new moon after, well, in the springtime equinox. So the names of the months and the origins, we have January. January was come from Janus. Janus was a Roman god who had two faces, and he could look both ways. He could see both forward and back at the same time. And that's what we do on New Year's Eve, pretty much, is We look forward to the new times, but we're looking backwards over where we've been. So that's, it's represented, Janus is represented by a doorway, and therefore was sacred to doorways. January is that doorway. February was from the Latin febris, as to cleanse, and they always had a festival of purification at that time. We still do that in a way. We have Groundhog's Day around that time, and February 1st actually aligns with the Chinese New Year that some celebrate. It actually aligns with some of our religious holidays in various traditions, which is akin to Groundhog's Day. It's celebrating that the spring is here, the spring is coming. I know that in the Catholic Church, they had a candle ceremony when you light candles, and called it Candlemas. March is the Roman god of war, who was Mars, and the government and military, they shut down for the winter when everything was cold and they didn't really have activity at that time. So then at this time in March, the winds whip up. They always say March roars in like a lion and goes out like a lamb. Well, it roars in, the military resumes, the government resumes after a time of inactivity. And April comes from Aperio, which is to open, and it represents the buds opening up in bloom in May, or April, that are going to bloom in May. May was for the Roman goddess Maya. She was an earth goddess, and she oversaw the growth of plants. June, Juno, patroness of marriage and well-being of women, and weddings are still to this day often celebrated in June. July, named after Julius Caesar. Not all the months by now are named after the Greco-Roman gods and goddesses or planets. They were actually, the planets were named after some of them also. So we have that after Julius Caesar. August was to honor the first Roman emperor, Augustus Caesar, who was the grandson of Julius Caesar. And September from septum. It's the 7th month of the early Roman calendar, and they kept that name for September. October in ancient Roman calendars was the 8th month from octo, meaning 8. And November from novum, which means 9, and December from Latin decim, meaning 10, like a decimal, right? We think of decimals in tenths, whatever. 10 days kind of represents it's the first unit of numbers before we get to 11, because you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and then 11 is the first number that has 2 numbers that aren't in the 1s to 9 or 0 to 9. And that was the 12th, the 10th month originally got switched or changed around. And you can read more information about it there at the website down at the bottom of the screen. Since this is being recorded, you can always go back. The days and months, the days of the week's origins are: Sunday is for the sun, Monday is for the moon, Tuesday is for Mars, Wednesday was named after Mercury, Thursday for Jupiter, Friday for Venus, and Saturday was for Saturn, or the Sabbath. And some of these older names of the months come from more Anglo-Saxon translations in our languages. Some of them are closer to how we would spell the months today in the Anglo-Saxon. And again, you can check that out on the website below. Those were also names of planets at the time. Of course, Venus was sacred to Aphrodite. Jupiter was Jove. Jupiter was like Zeus in Greek mythology. Mercury is the messenger god, and also of merchants. It's midweek, often busy in the middle of the week, I suppose. And Mars, Tuesday for martial things, of wars and things like that, and activity. So when we get into the Monday child rhyme, So Monday is Moon Day. So that's kind of why the Monday's child is full of face, because of the face of the moon. That's kind of where that comes from. You can see how things are often associated from one myth or legend or folklore, little tidbit of folklore to the next. Tuesday's child is full of grace. Well, I don't want to go back, but Tuesday's child is full of grace. Let's see, can I go back? Yeah. Well, I suppose you have to have grace to be in the art of war, the martial arts, and having to learn how to do sword fighting and things like that. Wednesday's child is full of woe. Let's see. Well, I know I can't go back, but okay, so Thursday's child has far to go. Friday's child is loving and giving. Saturday's child works hard for a living. Now today we have more of the Sabbath celebrated on Sunday for some traditions. And the child that is born on the Sabbath day is bonny and blithe, good and gay. Different versions of this rhyme have different attributions for the days, but this is the most usually noted one. And tales like this in folklore and the traditions are called fortune-telling rhymes. This poem or rhyme or nursery rhyme goes back to 1838. You can find it in the book that's listed here on the slide, Traditions of Devonshire, and there is some evidence that the types of rhymes were going on around in the 1570s in Suffolk, England. And what they did was foretell the luck that one might have due to the day that he or she was born. It might be a fun thing to look at what day you were born and what days your children were born. Of course, not everybody places their stock in fortune telling. It was kind of a fortune telling game. I mean, some people believed in superstitions. The world was more superstitious at one time than many of us are today. But these were fun things to also entertain themselves with in times when people were telling stories and, less apt to have a printed book to go look something up in or an encyclopedia. So they would tell rhymes and make things like this up. So when we talk about folklore and all the things that some of the little tidbits of it, fables are short stories, very often using animals to teach a moral lesson. Folklore is the traditional beliefs, legends, tales, and customs of people. This one happened to come from the Greek, but the whole idea about good and being good or being evil is pretty much universal. So usually there's a lot of universality to every folktale. So the folklore includes everything: the beliefs, the little superstitions of the days of the week, why the weeks were born, and then the folk tales. They are anonymous, timeless tales. You can come back to this slide and read more about it since it's being recorded. There's myths and fairy tales and legend. This one happens to be a fairy tale because even though most people would think of it as a folk tale, because there are supernatural beings, and the definition of the fairy tale is usually when there are supernatural beings involved in the tale. But in fairy tales, they're usually of diminutive size, so that usually the fairies were the little fairies. So anyhow, they blend now. They're used more interchangeably now than they were originally. So this actually is a good example of a folktale based on a myth, the myths being the religious stories of a day of an ancient time. We think of them as myths. People believed them back then. So they believed about the planets and things being sacred to certain days and things. So this is an example of how a folktale is a degeneration or has degenerated from a mythology story. And it means that the story once had more religious mythic roots, or those roots were seen better. But now the religion gets sort of watered down, taken out, and it's more of a folk tale, regardless of one's culture or where one is living. So that's this story is a good example of that. So thank you very much.